He gonna get it.
Good morning. Yes, good morning and welcome to the November 13th, 2024 Finance Advisory Committee. We've got a couple reports today. We're going to start with the ARP closeout. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. We have minutes to approve. Do we have? Yes. Do I have a motion to approve the October 9th, 2024 meeting minutes?
So moved.
Do I have a second? It has been moved in second. All in favor of approving, but yep, good. Do I have an approval of the agenda? Motion second. All in favor? Great. Now we can talk about the closeout of ARP. So remember, board members, these funds are no longer here, so we don't need to discuss them ad nauseum.
Good morning, everyone. I'm here today to provide the final update on the elementary and secondary school emergency relief funds, which were our ESSER funds. So just grants managed by compensatory programs. On the left are the ones that we do yearly, and then the ones on the right are the ones that we picked up through ESSER. And the only two that have not been closed out but are in the process of closing out are the two American Rescue Plan and then the American Rescue Plan Homeless. So CARES 1, we've been through all this. I'll just go through it quickly. We received $10,929,786. This closed on September 30th, 2022. We spent 100% of our funds. It was spent on PPE, cameras and microphone, remote learning software, iPads, Chromebooks, the temperature kiosks, prepackaged meals, cooler bags, network infrastructure, and classroom projectors. Then we had ESSER 2, which is the CARES Act 2. We received $44,088,599. This closed on September 30th, 2023, and we spent 100% of the allocated funds. And with these funds, we had learning loss software, summer programs, studies weekly, DBQs. Again, we had more PPE supplies, the prepackaged meals and utensils, technology for both students and staff. We purchased a low-touch fuel systems for the buses, two-way radios, Operation Ignite and compensatory services, summer teacher conferences, summer curriculum writing stipends, and COVID testing. So the ARP funds, which were ESSER 3, the district received $99,088,044. The grant ended on September 30th, 2024, but we requested an extension to December 15th. So currently we're at 91.1% spent, which is $92,223,540.61. And we have currently $5,662,569.93 in encumbrances. And then that leaves us with $1,201,933.46 for indirect cost. So American Rescue Plan funds were used on the Wellness Center and wellness counselors. We had various positions in the district. We had dean of students, assistant principals, technology support staff, contact tracing assistants, learning specialists, ARP purchasing agency, and ARP clerk. We purchased instructional software, iReady, Nearpod, Illuminate, iReady, and LightSail. Summer programs for staff, transportation, and supplies. We did incentives for the vaccine, retention, school nutrition employees, and transportation. We have purchased math and science manipulatives, Lysol disinfecting wipes, and sanitizing supplies. We purchased interactive boards, Chromebooks, and staff laptops. Again, we did the Teaching and Learner Summer Conference, so we had speakers, stipends, and supplies. We had more COVID testing, and two of our last big purchases were the water bottle filling stations and installation, which is currently happening in the schools across school and district buildings across the district. And we have also purchased 2 flight simulators. The encumbrances that we are working to close out, so we can close this grant by December 15th, are the bottle fillers, the installation of them, cleaning supplies, the flight simulators, technology, science lab materials. We have some IEP tutorial referrals and professional services. And then this is just, even though this grant is ending, the technology and the equipment purchased with it still has to be used for the intent and purpose for which it was purchased. Are there any questions?
Go on ahead, Ms. Hall.
So you're saying anything that needs to be maintained going on, we have the funds in place and things won't stop just because the grant has stopped? We will maintain and continue to use the software and everything else that we got?
Yeah, well, if you look at like purchases for iReady and Amira, that's been purchased for this year. So for the coming school year, next year, 25, 26, the district would have to look at putting that into the district budget in order to continue funding it.
Okay, so that's something that we as a board then have to realize that we're going to have to step up now.
So, yeah,
To
go
supplant.
on ahead.
And I'll just say that as a part of that, this connects back to our return on investment conversation. So before we bring it to the board to ask for general funds to sustain it, we would be doing a return on investment analysis before we bring it back to you so that we can make sure that we're asking you for something that indeed had impact and not just asking to keep something just
Going.
because it's present now, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I'm sure when we initially decided how to spend the grant money, we had tangible goals that we hoped the program would meet. Am I correct? We didn't just say, oh, yeah, let's get a mirror. We said, look, looks like a mirror. I'm just saying, how will we know if it did well if we don't know what we were hoping for in the beginning?
I wasn't here when a lot of the
That's
things were
true.
present.
Yeah,
Right.
that's true.
The software, basically all of the software in the grant, we were already using prior to
I thought
us
so.
receiving the grant. But
Okay.
it's like Dr. Watts mentioned, now it's time for us to really evaluate those programs, especially the software, to make sure we want to continue using them.
Which we would be doing anyway.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
But to be clear, I don't know that there were well-established and codified goals written somewhere. So a lot of those things were purchased, and whoever presented it for a purchase probably had a goal in mind, but I'm not sure that that goal was articulated somewhere that we could go back and refer to. Does that make sense?
I guess our memories are not going to,
There
we're
are,
not going to be able to.
there are some presentations,
Yeah, so we'll just have to go back.
PowerPoints where this was gone, these purchases were gone through and some discussion there.
Right.
But I don't know if there's something more specific than that.
We will probably have to comb through presentations and find out what the initial intent was. But we can do that. That's not difficult.
Dr. Howard Hall, and then I'm going to come back to this discussion.
Yes, I just like to say that sustainability is important, and I see that that's what you all were doing when you look at things such as conferences and the curriculum writing, so those are sustainable things. So I do recall the different presentations, and sustainability was key in this, and I see a good use of those fundings.
And the last two summers, they've, Curriculum and Instruction has put on the teaching and learning conferences over the summer, and they have been very well attended. But if there's been any follow-through to see whether or not that everything's being implemented is not in my department, so I'm unsure of that. But I know they were very highly attended.
Okay, thank you.
So on the conversation that we're having that Dr. Watts was, there was intent in all of the purchases to move the needle, whether it be academics, whether it be teacher retention, yada, yada, yada. But it was never written, this is how we're going to measure, the teachers come to that conference, was there a follow-up to see 85% of the teachers that went to that are now implementing this, and that implementation has moved this needle for these students, which is what I do believe Stacy's doing with her team, which is wonderful, and that's why we're having this conversation. So my big, and That's what we need to continue to do. And that, we'll have that lovely big spreadsheet again of stop, start, add more, reevaluate. Anecdotally, or however you feel, because I'm sure you're in conversations on return on investment with some of these funds. What are we maybe looking to be pitched from ESSER and ARP that worked? We might not have perfect data on it, but we want to continue it because we're going to now look for that data. Is there anything, and I'm not trying to say you're putting something out there that's going to happen, but from the expert that's been dealing with these funds, what do you think went well? What are we maybe going to see in the few months, leading up to the budget that might be on that, we're getting rid of that? Or this is somewhere where you better be prepared as a board member, this is coming in to be in the general fund?
Yep, so I think it would be important, and we don't have it present for you all today, but we do have it, a program inventory. And our program inventory that we have is going to mention a lot of these things. So that's going to be the best place to answer your question if we cross-reference those two things. I would say anything particularly related to our curriculum implementation, which would include Amira would be on there. Likely things that are related to COVID specifically, like COVID testing, prepackaged meals and utensils. We'd probably be able to give you a number on how many things were distributed or how many people were impacted, but we're not going to be able to tell you what the impact of those things were.
I don't need the impact, but I think when you start pitching the programs you want in the general fund or whatever fund that's moving forward outside of ARP, if you could say, hey, this is something that we began or that we funded throughout our, like with Amira, it was already funded before, then we funded it with ARP, and now we're going to continue to fund it. I think that will help board members know that this wasn't some new shiny thing. This was already there. We just funded it a different way when money came from the feds, and now we're going to have to pick it back up. Or this is something that was brand new, and we think it should continue with some rationale. That's all I'm looking for.
Yep.
Yeah.
One of the things I would say is the wellness center and the wellness counselors. I think when our students came back from being at home for that extended length of time, some of them came back with some issues, and I think the wellness center and the wellness counselors is something that would need to continue. Of course, that's my opinion.
Yeah, and again, I'm not trying, we aren't going to say Missy said.
But I do want to
Just
point out,
budget item.
since you mentioned the Wellness Center, there are a number of positions that we included in the current budget, FY25 budget. So if you go back and look at your notes, there are a number of positions that we rolled over from the grant into the general fund. There's some software that was in the grant that we put back in the general fund. So there's a good bit of it we moved already back to the general fund throughout the budget process. There's just a handful of software programs that are left. But our plan is to bring forward the inventory, I believe possibly at the January meeting, just to give you a status update of where we are
Yeah,
in that
and I think
process.
the history that I was saying kind of helps.
Yes.
Like, because we up here forget quite often that was paid for, came out, came back in. Just so we
Same with-
remember, so it doesn't, and then when people ask, well, you bought that new thing, like, well, no, we've always paid for that. It's just, it got funded by something different because, yay, somebody was giving us different money.
Yes.
That's all.
Summer school will continue. It's just going to have to be funded,
Yeah.
through different funds now. So, there are some things that will continue. just
And
funding
again, I
different.
think it's just important that as we move forward, when we start things like the Wellness Center, we have a specific data point named on the front end to say, we're going to purchase this, we're going to have counselors and positions, and this is the anticipated impact. So when you ask that type of question, we can be really clear about, did we attain the intended impact or not? I think all the pieces are there. It's just not as tight, and it's not written somewhere in one place where we can find it. So I think a lot of the pieces to this are there. What we're trying to do is just put it together.
Oh,
so
and
that it's
remember,
easy
it's
to-
just November, so we're good. We got time before we actually are having to, cut things off of the list. So go on ahead, Ms. Hall.
One thing I remember so well, Mr. Connick, is how we fed kids and families. I'll never forget that. We did an outstanding job. That's something we can actually personally attest to that happened. I'm always looking for comparisons, though, and these funds went out across the state and across the nation. So I'd be very interested. I don't know that Academic Affairs has the capacity to do that, but to know how some of these programs did in other areas, and maybe we didn't do well here, but they did fabulously well, in other. So I think comparisons are always good before we decide, it was terrible, or,
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I'm going to have Ms. Cooley actually do the budget process first, because I feel like we won't have as much. Is that okay with you, to do the calendar?
revenue one or the
The
calendar?
calendar, yeah, because
that's
I
fine.
hope we don't have a ton of questions on the calendar. These are just all your calendar invites, save the dates. We'll get it in a magnet form so you can put it on your fridge.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Is it still morning? Yes, it is. How is everyone today? I hope everybody's doing all right. The first thing I'm going to talk about is the calendar for this year, for the next year's budget process. The first thing on the first slide is just our strategic map. And of course, as far as finance, it falls under the stewardship area. Maintain an effective budget process that ensures an equitable allocation of resources to provide high-quality educational services. So that's our goal. This is our tentative budget, and I'm presenting it so that when it is voted on generally in January, you'll have time to look it over, see if we need to move anything around, change dates, or if something needs to be added. It is similar. October was just our Finance Advisory Committee. We've started our enrollment process right now. We're looking at where places were redistricted. We're in discussions with operations so we can find out where the kids are moving, so we know how to do projections for our enrollment next year. January, everything kind of gets going really fast. That's where the calendar that you're looking at now, y'all will decide what dates, the approval dates. We'll be sending out our per pupil allotments to the school sites in January and our staffing projections. February is our advisory meeting. In March, we begin the surveys and presentations about what the public wants. We start putting that out there and talking to different groups, the professional senate of the teachers and the public, and ask them to go online and fill out what they're looking for in a budget for next school year. The preliminary budget book goes to, the draft goes to the superintendent on the 9th. We start doing our press releases, the big things in April. We have to have 2 public hearings, which will be on May 7th and 14th. We then also, starting in June, we are going to, those are our millage rate hearings, and that is going to be happening. We've got on the calendar for June 11th, the morning at 11 a.m. and our evening at 6 p.m. that day, and then our third hearing on the 18th at 6:30. Our items of focus for next year are inflation is increasing, so we're trying to keep up with the cost of employee compensation, our salaries and benefits, building maintenance, facility renovations, our need for additional qualified teachers, the literacy skills for students, and classroom supplies. We are also focusing on needing more buses and bus drivers for our students. Food service, we're looking into different ways of providing nutritious and affordable meals for all. Safety and security, emergency preparedness, money for that, surveillance and staff training. Safety is obviously a very important thing. Establish clear policies and expectations for artificial intelligence, AI use. That's another focus that's coming at us real quickly, and we probably need to look at establishing what sort of policies and how to determine if people are using AI to do things maybe they shouldn't be, like their schoolwork. Reduce federal funding, which is what Missy just talked about. It's expiring, it expired, and so we have done this year, like Larry stated, we moved most of all of the people that were out there. We didn't let anyone go. The vacancies were about the only thing we didn't maybe include in the budget, but we didn't really cut much of the COVID funding, at least personnel-wise. And then our continued financial stability with our budget. These are the topics that we are doing in our Finance Advisory Committee meetings. These are the various things over the next several months through May. And that's it on there, if anybody has any questions.
Mr. Catchmar.
This may have been covered at a previous meeting, but the ROI analysis that was mentioned the last board meeting or whenever it was mentioned, and I saw it on this slide, like when are we getting a report? Are we getting a verbal summary? And ballpark, when is that going to be? Because that's going to inform a lot of our budget discussions.
I would say around January, you will start getting some of the analysis we've done, but if we don't have it here today, but there are a lot of programs. We won't do a full ROI on all of those for this next budget, but we're going to look at the ones that we know require the most time, people, and money. That's kind of the direction I've given the staff. Let's do the ROI analysis on the programs that require the most funding, the most human resource, and the most time committed, and those are the ones that we will put first.
Got it. So what I'm hearing is kind of rolling as we.
Yes.
And we'll get to what we can before we actually have to
Yes.
make budget decisions.
Absolutely.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you for the presentation. Just out of curiosity, when we talk about inflation, how do we calculate the increase in salaries based upon that?
Well, in the past, we've generally looked at what Governor Kemp has proposed for the teachers, and then we try to incorporate that into our COLA for the staff members. That's what we have been. We, of course, that can change year to year. I've been here a long time, and there's been different amounts. Sometimes different people get different COLA. We've tried to remain uniform, but we've been trying to do better than what the state. Last year, we made sure that we at least equaled or were greater. Most people got higher than what the state would have been. So that's what our focus has been in the past, and I'm just kind of waiting to see what the governor's proposals are for teachers and waiting for direction from the cabinet on where we're going to go with COLAs.
And just as a reminder, we are in the middle of a second compensation study, so I think that would be another indicator of how we might look at employee compensation. So what the state gives us, and then what our own internal metrics include.
Ms. Hall.
Since we have Ms. Campbell here, I want to make sure that when we're using acronyms and that kind of thing, that we illuminate her on what we're talking about. You may know what ROI is, but just in case, we need to be sure that we're including.
Thank you for that reminder.
Did you have some? And on Mr. Catchmar, on your point, I know this year, Ms. Taylor and her team are like trying to build that program list, trying to figure out what pins they want to use as their needles for the metrics. And as that is built, roll it out. But I would hope moving forward that we will have that list and be able to actually have it on a cycle of these committee meetings where every January we discuss these couple of programs and get the rundown on that and our return on investment on that program, so that it becomes a new portion of the finance side of things. I think building the arc probably is how big it is, and sailing it all in one cycle is going to be a big ask. But as much of that information is, yeah, and I think that's right. What's the biggest piece of the pie, so that we can hopefully digest it as early as possible, so that when it comes time to fuss about numbers, we have most of the pie to talk about. So Mr. Catchmar and then Dr. Tanya Haldar.
Yeah, 100% agree, and I was just asking expectations-wise, you guys are building it, which is fine, and I like the approach of the most time-consuming and of resources and finances first. I'm just thinking, particularly with the loss of grant money and COVID funds, it's particularly acute this year because we're going to have to make harder decisions on continuing some programs and not others with the loss of related revenue. So that pushes the millage issue, particularly when we're going for East Plus next year, in theory. So
I do want to highlight what Mr. Jackson said. Most of the things that we felt last year had a good return on investment. That's what ROI is, return on investment. We already moved into the general fund. So it will lessen this list quite a bit of the things that we need to talk about moving from AARP over to the general fund. But there are programs that we're currently funding in the general program that we need to do a return on investment on as well.
agree, and I think back the last 5 years, I think. You stand up there and say, this year we have an additional $15 million in unfunded mandates from the state and increased TRS costs, and we got to buy the same radio for all of our first responders, and buses now have to be painted Amarillo yellow instead of Big Bird yellow. And so, but we know every year we've got another 14 or 15 million.
You just gave them something new to pass along.
I know, right?
Orange.
Yeah.
Got it.
Thank you.
Dr. Town-Haldwell?
I know that we're having a compensation study. Have we considered compensation internally for our administrators, for example? For the most part, we pay our teachers and administrators based on their certification and their years of experience. But have we considered enrollment, whereas some school principals may have 300 students as opposed to another principal with close to 2,000, and they're all on the same pay scale? I know that in some different districts, they do include enrollment that has a big impact, and it's more responsibility on that administrator. So are we looking into that?
I will defer to Mr. Ray, but I will say my current understanding of how we fund our administrators is very similar to what you just described. Aspirationally, I would like to look at some differentiated pay depending on things like enrollment, poverty, programs. The complexity of a school matters, and all leadership at every school is not the same. And so I do think there is a need to look at complexity and how do we not only do that in terms of compensation, but even how we do it for staffing. And that was a conversation we had as recent as yesterday. Do we have a formula in place that I refer to as weighted student staffing? So if you have a school that has a large majority of poverty, large majority of special education, are we supporting that school in a differentiated way? Do teachers and principals get paid differently? Do the staffing allocations look different? So I think what you're referring to is definitely something that I'm interested in. It's aspirational. But I will turn it over to Mr. Ray to fill in other gaps as it relates to the study.
Yes, and Dr. Watts is correct. I think those are the things that we want to be able to get to. To answer the question directly, we have done some assessments in the past. Godley Station was one that we always paid that principal more when there were 1,600 students compared to other principals. So we have done that on a limited basis. We do get those inquiries about high school principals in particular because of all that they have to do with all of the extracurricular activities. So those are something that we will continue to revisit. Once with this compensation study, the value of it is we're comparing it with other districts, over 20 other districts that are in Georgia, and I think Charleston and Jacksonville are part of that as well. But it will give us an idea of what other districts do. So we can see those things that other districts are doing related to that once we go through this certified study. So what you're talking about is the certified side, and that's what we'll be doing right now, looking at those things related to principals, related to district administrators that are certified as well. And that's what will be happening with this study.
Long talk, but Ms. Hall?
Just real quickly, I'm so happy to hear Dr. Watts say, looking at the complexity of schools, because I was a principal at some schools where I couldn't get to the kids because the parents were there every day wanting to do everything. So in many ways, it made my job much easier. But we have also schools where that parent support is not there, and that makes a huge difference. So I'm hoping in your complexity, you're thinking about things like that, the actual weight of the job.
Moving along, Ms. Cooley, you can now help everyone understand how we get funded through local taxes.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to go over a brief presentation on understanding our local tax revenues. These are different definitions, and I kind of want to go through them quickly just because they really do mean something. We have out of our property tax revenue, we have our ad valorem, and the property tax revenue is the one that is connected to the millage rate, which is a big deal because this is where you decide whether to increase, decrease, or remain the same with the millage rate. That money comes from ad valorem taxes, are one of them, which is our real property and our personal property. The real property, of course, is our real estate, which involves our building and our land. And it's based on 40% of your home's fair market value minus the exemptions. And a big thing I want to point out here, because a lot of people kind of will put the blame on us for the amount that their housing is assessed, but that is not done by the Board of Education. That is determined by the Chatham County Board of Assessors. So if your property goes up a lot, even if we don't raise the millage rate, if they've increased the value of your property, obviously your taxes are going to go up. So that is not determined by us. And property taxes are due on the June 1st and November 15th of each year, and I believe you can wait until November 15th if you don't want to pay on June 1st, but they just try to make it easier in a two-payment. Ad valorem commission fee. This is something that when I started doing this was very interesting to me, and I'll show some figures of how much this cost our district. This is the amount the Chatham County Tax Commissioner Office collects our taxes for us. We do not collect it. They then they collect the taxes, and we used to get it on a monthly basis. Now it's on a weekly basis. And the amount they charge us to collect our taxes is 1.75% of the amount collected. So just wanted to kind of mention that because you're going to see the figures for that, and that's what comes off out of it. So if we collect a certain amount, they take that out with their collection fee, and then we get the difference between those two numbers. Real property delinquent. Anytime something is not paid by the due date, it's considered delinquent. And that's one we have to kind of estimate each year because we don't know who's going to pay taxes delinquent. We get a lot of figures from the assessor's office on the amount we should take in, but delinquency is one that we have to do a projection on. Vehicles. This is, if any of you remember, this is, if you've lived here long enough, like I have, prior to 2013, we collected ad valorem tax, which was connected to the millage rate on our vehicles. I refer to this, and I think what a lot of people refer to, it's a birthday tax for vehicles. That is no longer the way that we collect it. But if you owned a vehicle prior to, in 2012 or prior, and you haven't sold it and you're still driving it, you are still paying an ad valorem tax on it each year based on the value of it. So that is part of ad valorem. The new tax way they do it is when you buy the vehicle, they charge 7% of the fair market value when you buy it, and that money comes in that year that you purchase it, and all you have to pay after that, if you don't sell the vehicle or change hands with it, you just pay that one time, and then you only have to pay like $21 a year for your tag. So that is not connected to the millage rate. And I just wanted to make that clear because the vehicles used to be part of our millage rate from 2012 prior, but since they put it in tab T, it is a different tax. It is a local tax, but it is not connected to the millage rate. Mobile homes, that is considered a personal property because it is movable and it's billed a little differently than how homes are. They are billed by February 1st and taxes are due on April 1st for mobile homes. Heavy-duty equipment, which includes things such as forklifts, the tractors, and anything that's propelled over a certain weight, are billed as received by dealers. So that tax is collected by the dealers and sent to the tag office, and then they disperse it to us. Revenue in lieu of taxes, that's property taxes. That's property where the owner does not have to pay taxes, and revenue comes from either the city of Savannah or Chatham County. Examples of this are there's some kind of situation with like Home Depot. I noticed when I was looking into this, we get money for Home Depot. It must be something to do with their warehouses out there. Dollar General also. They send us money because apparently when they came here, they must have gotten some kind of deal not to pay taxes. So the city pays certain ones and the county pays the others. This is local revenue on this slide that is local, but it is not connected to our millage rate. So if you change the millage rate, this will not affect the total amounts that we get for these items. And one of them is the one that replaced the vehicle ad valorem in 2013, which is our TAV-T, our title ad valorem tax. It's a one-time tax paid when vehicles are titled or when ownership changes, and it's 7% of the fair market value. That is not connected to the millage rate. Also, we get money from real estate transfers. That's collected and dispersed by the clerk of Superior Court. That's on intangible taxes. It's like some deeds and real estate transfers. So that is also not connected to the millage rate. And I put this down here because one of the things when I'm going in and we're trying to do a projection is we review the prior 3 to 5 years of history to kind of get estimates. I have many, many years, but we try to look at more in the past 3 to 5. We will go back even further because we do have a lot of data on it. So we do that, and we have to come up with projections before, when we start this process. And then the assessor's office, usually at the end of May, beginning of June, they send us their numbers. And at that, we take a certain percentage of that, what we expect to collect, and then we do project the delinquencies because they don't give us anything for that. And that's how we come up with our projections. Setting property tax revenue, setting the millage rate. The millage rate is set to levy property taxes necessary to fund the local revenue necessary to meet the board's goals in the tentative or the approved budget. Early estimates of change in tax digest are provided by the tax assessor's office, which it assists us in revenue projections for property taxes. We have to consider many local factors when we're doing this. Plant closures, residential growth, property value reassessments, which has been a big thing locally. We have had a thriving economy in Chatham County, so the majority of people's property, as well as this is nationwide, has gone up a lot. So that is also considered. And then we consider tax abatement agreements. This slide is just showing you a blank form of what the tax digest looks like. Of course, it has a lot of numbers on it when we get it each year, but this is what the form looks like. This is our actual local property revenue, and these are the revenues that are connected to the millage rate. These are not the TAV-T, which doesn't have to do with it, or the real estate transfer. These are only our revenues which are affected by the millage rate. And these revenues here show from 2018 what we budgeted through 2021. In 2018, as you can see, we budgeted $212.7 million for local property that is connected to the millage rate. What we actually received was $3.2 million less than our projections. So we projected less. That was back. Our millage rate at that time was 18.881 mils, if you recall. We go into 2019, and as you can see, our adopted budget was $252.6 million budgeted. We also underestimated we overestimated, excuse me, and I hope I said that right before, we overestimated in 2018 and 2019 our revenues from what we actually received. As you can see, in 2019, we only received 251.1, so we were short about $1.5 million in 2019. In 2020, we projected revenues of 261.8. We only collected 255.2. So we projected $6.5 million less than we actually received. Now for 2018, 2019, and 2020, that was when the millage rate remained the same. It was 18.881. This is when, if anybody that's been here a while can recall, our fund balance was low at that time, and we were doing tax anticipation notes, which nobody wants to do. So that's one reason we had increased the millage rate at that time. Well, starting in 2021, we started to become more healthy on our fund balance. So that year, we went down from 18.881, which was in 2020, to 2021 became 18.131, which was a reduction of 0.75 mils. As you can see, that year, even with the reduction, our projections were higher than what we actually received. We projected $274.9 million. We received $274.4 million. So we were off a little less than $500,000 that year from what we projected. So for those 4 years, you can see that we were actually over-projecting our revenues. In fiscal year '22, we projected $277 million in revenues, and we collected $272 million. So we projected $4.8 million more than we actually received. And in that year, our millage rate, our millage rate remained, the millage rate, went down to 17.631. We reduced it again by 0.5 mils. So when we get to 22, we went down another 0.5, and we're down to 17.631 mils. So in fiscal year '23, we projected revenues of $313.3 million, and we actually collected for the first time in '23 more than we projected, which was $316.3 million, which was an increase of $2.9 million. So just to kind of give you an overview, we have historically been collecting less than we're projecting, other than last year. 2024 figures are still not complete until the ACER, their financial statements are signed off on and they're completing. They're still moving monies and making adjustments. So we did not put what 2024 is because we do not know at this time right now. We will soon know that, but right now it's on hold. And this completes it. Has anybody got any questions?
Ms. Hall?
First of all, how much of this information does the public have, and how much of do they understand as far as you're concerned?
Well, what they have is, all of these figures are in our budget, our adopted budget book, but of course it is listed with a bunch of other figures in it, and I've kind of took those pieces out to explain, because a lot of people don't realize, like TAV-T is not part of the millage rate, stuff like that. So this is kind of what this is for. This is an informational, educational, and also for you to see how your millage rate, when you're going to adopt a certain millage rate, how we have been doing as far as our projections for it. Typically, we've been projecting more than we actually got.
Yeah.
So
But to-
Stacy, I'm wondering from our conversation yesterday whether or not Kurt's group would be able to do something with this information out-facing to the public that would help us, especially when it comes time for millage rate and that kind of thing, for there to be a better understanding between the public and us about what actually is going on. Would this be something that might be included in that work?
It could definitely be included, and we will have collected that information and data. So if we want to make it public facing, we can.
Okay.
What we've tried to do in the past was create a portion on the website, up on the finance, and talk about the budget process and try to include all of these informational type presentations that are included during that budget process. We have some information that we try to leave out there from year to year, just so anybody can go reference if they ask questions about local tax revenue or if they have questions about QBE. We have different presentations that we try to keep on the website. I know we just changed the website a little bit, and I think we have to go back and make sure all the presentations are ADA compliant, but we want to put those back out there so there's information that anyone can go look at and understand our process.
Well, Mr. Jackson, at the neighborhood meetings I go to when it's tax time, all I hear is, they see what they owe the Board of Education, and it looks like we're just decimating everybody.
Yes.
So there needs to be some kind of way to help us out. We've got to get that understanding.
Yes, and that could
Out there.
that could be another presentation by itself to inform the public that yes, our millage rate may be higher than other municipalities, but the public doesn't understand that the other municipalities have other revenue streams. Yeah, they may not have a high millage rate, but they're going to tax you and fee you on everything else. So you're going to pay fees for everything, parking fees, inspection fees, anything they can charge a fee for. That's how they collect their additional revenue. Water and sewage, everything else. So they have other avenues to collect money. We don't. We can't charge taxpayers or kids to attend school, but they can charge fees for everything else.
Can I also mention, I did not state this, but we had talked about that ad valorem collection fee, or commission fee is what they call it. And I just wanted to point out that second row, that is what they take out to collect the money for us. So I just wanted you to realize, like in '23, $5.7 million is what we pay for the collection of our money from. So we lose. I didn't mention that, but I had wanted to kind of just make that known because a lot of people don't realize how much it costs to collect that money, to pay the county. We pay the county for that.
And she points that out because internally for years, from day one, it's always been kind of an inside joke. Okay, we fund the entire tax commissioner's office budget
Well,
just from what they collect from us.
City of Savannah collects their own taxes, as you notice. That's why there's this like a separate thing. They do their own, but it's a lot more trouble than people realize. But you don't have to have them collect it, but it is. I just kind of wanted to point that out because that is something that some people don't understand,
Ms. Grabowski?
So to the point of making this public facing, can you go back to that, Ms. Cooley?
Certainly.
I know this is probably pulled directly from the description that's in the software and so forth, but if we can make the language more clear in our presentations, I think that would be really helpful instead of it saying add call fee when people aren't going to know what that means.
Right, exactly.
Say
Yeah.
fee paid for, just make it a little bit more
It all
user-friendly.
ties to this page too, if you want to go back and look at it. That's why I tried to kind of put
And I
what
do
it
know I
was.
came in late, so.
Yeah, it was on slide 2. I went through what each one was and where it came from and where.
But even that, like ad valorem commission fee, doesn't really translate to what is on that table. So
We
just
can- yeah, we
making
can
it
make
more
that
user-friendly.
adjustment.
And then to Mr. Jackson's point about, if we do that public-facing document, how are we different from a local government? Like, local government provides water services, sewer services. They send you a bill for those services. Our services are included. So I think, again, just making some of that a little bit more user-friendly can be helpful from a communication standpoint.
I don't see anybody that wants to ask you more questions, Ms. Cooley. You are off the hot seat. I would like to thank everybody for coming to this meeting. We will have our next meeting in January. Please, to the public, understand that, as you saw from the calendar, this is a year-long process that is constant. We have meetings almost every month to help us be educated, but also to educate you. as the community, so please engage with board members so that we can engage with district staff, so that we can build the budget together and not all in May and June. And I will continue to say that at the end of every single finance committee. Thank you. Motion to adjourn? All in favor? See y'all back at 1 if you want to do some more school boarding today.